Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, or um, happy hour, or happy breakfast, or whatever. Really great for you to be joining us again today. This is the next in the series called Coaching Matters. Coaching Matters was created by the Global Athletics Coaching Academy to get experts brought in to talk about big issues for coaches. And one of the things that's always been a big issue with all coaches, it doesn't matter whether they're coaching beginners, developers, or elite performers, is the idea of the practical stuff. You know, coaches are desperate to get ideas of practical stuff. And is there a problem with that? Oh, on the one hand, no, of course, we want them to be knowledge hungry. But the problem could be at the other end when perhaps on social media and all the stuff that we've got these days, it's just possible that they'll pick up on exercises and drills and so on that really have got very little substance to them, might even be bad for athletes, but because they're up there, an inexperienced coach will grab them. And so part of today is about hopefully putting towards them the idea of their own critical thinking, you know, really think through what it is. Why is the exercise there? What is it? And how is it to be done? Anyway, without any further ado, let me pass on to Richie Mercado, who's going to be the host for today.
Thank you, Frank, and welcome to everyone. We've got a great panel today. I'm going to introduce them one by one, and then each of them will give a little view of their background, especially how they've developed their technique and their use of it over the years. And we're going to start off with Rita Engelbrecht from South Africa, South African national hurdles coach. Very successful long career coaching hurdles and in mentoring coaches. So Rita, why don't you go ahead and give us a little introduction of your background?
Okay, good evening. Thank you very much. And it's a privilege to be here. I've started coaching when I was a full-time teacher. And when I was teaching as a younger teacher, we had to do sport. And I mean, being a provincial and national athlete myself, it was a natural course to follow. And hurdles was always different for me because as a hurdles coach, because I always felt it had more challenges than just sprinting. I mean, I've changed my mind recently because I realized sprinting involves just as much skills and knowledge as hurdles. So that is why I ended up hurdling and a hurdles coach and visit several countries and people overseas, which I'll talk a little bit about when I do my presentation. Thank you.
All right. We also have Craig Poole from the United States, longtime coach at Brigham Young University. It's the national team coach, still coaching athletes in his retirement and doing a great job of that, especially with hurdlers. And so, Craig, introduce your background and talk about whatever you want to related to your ideas of technical development.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be on with all of you and to actually pick up on a few more hints that I can use for my own coaching. I'm a kind of what you'd call a genetics coach. And what I mean by that is my father was a coach and he told me never to be a coach. So here I am. So that's the way it starts and that's the way it goes. But anyway, I started my career as coaching in a junior high school. I spent 5, 6 years coaching junior high school, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, where I was really winged, if you wish, on the various techniques that are available for the various events. And like everything else, I was kind of entranced with speed. So I spent most of my time focusing on sprints. And in junior high school, we didn't do hurdles. So it was basically sprints, jumps, and throws. Uh, then after I was at the junior high school for that number of years, then I was at a high school. And I spent 10 years coaching in a high school. And then from there, um, I was very fortunate in the fact that my teams happened to win. So I was invited to go on to university coaching, and where I spent 30 years at BYU. Retired from BYU and then came down to Chula Vista here in California, San Diego area. And I spent 4 years at the Olympic Training Center running that program. Retired from that, and then I've been coaching individual athletes ever since. So that's kind of the background as far as my coaching history is concerned. My main area that I focus on and have always focused on and based my program around has been combined events. Combined events is very enticing to me because you actually get to sample all of the events that cross the spectrum. You have the sprints, you have the jumps, you have the throws, and to a certain limited degree, you have some endurance type of events. So that's where I come from, and I enjoyed the science, and I try to bridge the gap between the science and the application, and that's my main focus. Thanks.
Thank you, Craig. And finally, we have Cliff Rovelto, just recently retired from a long and illustrious career at Kansas State, and also a great career that's still continuing coaching elite athletes, not just from the States, but from all over the world. And again, a lot of combined events background there, but and he'll probably mention this, but I also love the fact that he didn't come directly from track and field, and some of his mentors weren't even always track and field coaches. I think it's important for coaching development to get outside of our box there. But anyway, Cliff, give us a summary of your background and why you do what you do.
Well, thanks, Richie, for inviting me to your call today. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure I'll learn a lot as well. I started coaching at the high school level after getting an education degree at the University of Kansas. I was there for basically 3 years, and then went to the University of Kansas as a grad assistant. Bob Timmons was the head coach at that time, who was Jim Ryan's coach, very successful collegiate coach. My background in track and field, I should add this in, was non-existent. As a youth, I never competed in the sport of track and field. I basically did every sport but track and field. And when I started coaching in high school, actually thought I was going to go more the direction of basketball. Really, my intention was to go to law school, and that's what I was planning to do. And then at the high school level, I coached everything: football, basketball, track and field. We started the cross country program. But anyway, so from there, I went to the University of Kansas and reunited, I guess. As an undergraduate at the University of Kansas, when I took the coaching of track and field class, my instructors were Bob Timmons and Gary Pepin, two Hall of Fame coaches in the United States, had tremendous success at collegiate and both international level. Then I was hired full-time on the women's side at University of Kansas, coached 5 years on the women's side, so a total of 7 at the University of Kansas. Then went to Kansas State, spent the last, 36 years. I retired a year ago this past summer, but I was at Kansas State for 36 years. And there, worked with wonderful coaches, Steve Miller, John Capriotti, a number of other, Daryl Anderson, number of wonderful coaches there as well. I think I consider myself to be kind of a product of the coaching education program, if you will, in the United States. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But I do consider myself to be a product of that. As I said, I had no background in track and field at all whatsoever. But I did have a background in biomechanics and exercise physiology from my undergraduate studies and graduate studies. My master's thesis was on pole vault. So I started at the very ground level, and was in large part self-taught. But as Richie mentioned, some of my mentors were phenomenal football and basketball coaches in the United States at the high school and collegiate levels. And so my background may be a little bit different, but I think it had served me well in my time in sport.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go back to each of you with this, throw this out, and more specifically aimed at your use of technical drills to get at the result you want to in terms of developing the technical abilities of athletes in a specific event or in general. Maybe what's your journey with that? Meaning you've coached for a long time. I talked a little bit with Craig about this the other day, and I started out and just tried to learn drills from other people, didn't really think about why they were being done. You tend to copy and you overuse and you have too many drills. And over time, you change, so maybe what's been your process there in terms of how you started and where you are now, maybe in general, about the use of technical drills and what your basic foundation principles are on how you apply them. So, Rita?
Thank you. I would just like to share my screen with you. Okay. And can you all see that? Yep.
Yes.
Okay. What I want to start off with is to say, and I think that is the instructions that we got from you, Richie, as well, as why, what, and how we do hurdle drills. I think that is very important. And when we start to talk about drills, drills are not something new. The basic drills evolved from the military drills that started with the ancient Greeks and the Roman soldiers that practiced for hours and hours so that they could get anything correctly. Okay, so what happens is that what we say here is that no drill, movement, or exercise stand in isolation. I think each drill and each stride is in harmony with the whole body. That is such an important principle, and that training drills is part of your training philosophy as a coach. So each drill, part of the drill makes part of the whole. For example, if we talk about hurdles, your position before, over, after the hurdle, clearing time, step lengths, knee and ankle joint ankles, all of that is part of the drills, but also part of the movement. And remember, there are very specific drills to each event. We know that senior athletes should try more advanced workouts. There's also a debate about that. But, for example, I would like to know that if you ever can watch Novak Djokovic warm-up drills that are so specific, increases spatial awareness and mobility, and very important, his fascia awakening. Now, if we ask why do we design drills and develop, what is important for me is that drills are used in sport events to develop, refine, and reinforce specific skills by breaking down a complex movements like a hurdles race, running over hurdle, and allowing for a focused repetition. Very important fact is that drills build muscle memory. They improve coordination and technique, enhance fitness, and strengthen mental resilience. If an athlete knows they can do the drills well, their self-belief start, and we'll talk about that now. This leads to greater consistency and confidence during competitions. Drills also provide a controlled environment for coaches to offer immediate, specific feedback and correct flaws before they become ingrained, ensuring efficient and organized skill development. I had certain drills that I did with my hurdlers very slowly, and I sometimes walked to them and I took their knee in my one hand and their foot in the other, and I used to guide them over the hurdles without saying a word. And sometimes it just clicked. You had to do it 3 or 4 times, but it did help doing that. Now, very important what Tom Walden said is that movement speaks to the brain in a language of sensation. And here we have to talk about spatial awareness. Why is spatial awareness such an important a factor nowadays? Is the fact that the youngsters of today don't have the spatial awareness because of the type of games they don't play anymore, because of the like, for example, iPads and things like that. So we have to talk about spatial awareness, and we have spatial awareness drills nowadays as well. So what we say is that we need to improve performance. We need to prevent injuries, because you need to know where you are in relation to your body and, for example, hurdles that you clear. Your strategy and your tactics, and here is important, like especially in the 400-meter hurdles, sometimes in the 100-meter hurdles as well. The wind can blow, you can hit a hurdle, and your stride pattern that is worked out in the 400s doesn't always work out, and then you need to be aware how you can adapt. Skill development is a very good sense of the space and spatial awareness and help athletes to improve all these skills. And then lastly, it will give them confidence. Now, what I want to mention here is how spatial awareness drills are done. And what I've done, I've taken examples of top hurdlers and a high jumper and what they do recently to help that I've seen what they do with spatial awareness. Sydney McLaughlin, we know she can do 100 hurdles in 12.67. She broke the 400-meter hurdle records 4 times. And she never seemed to hesitate in front of hurdles. She can make adaptations. She can juggle balls. Her mother taught her when she was 3 years old. So that spatial development is well ingrained in how she conducts herself over the hurdles. Sasha Zoya, we know the junior that broke the world record, first person, although the hurdles were lower, below sub 12.8, is a very accomplished ballet dancer and dancing person. He comes from that comes from his mother. He is brilliant over the hurdles. He's just plagued a little bit with injuries at the moment. Now, one person that I want to mention specifically, and that is Nicola McDermott. And we know that she is of Ollie Schlagers, also known as now with her married name. She's a very tall girl, long levers, long legs. And we know that she always sort of stabilized at 196, 198. And she had a 201, but then she always falls back to 198. She started doing gymnastics. And I followed her and saw how she struggled to, for example, do there you can see a somersault, a back flip, and to know where she is in space. And we know how she's improved. A PB on Friday or Saturday, on Friday, with the taking the final competition of the World Athletics Championships and the Diamond League. And I can see that she knows now where to take off and how to go forward. Then very short example of hurdle drills that are well commonly known as, we have wall drills, we have single hurdle drills, close hurdle drills, and that's especially for hip mobility, speed drills, distant drills, and drills to improve spatial awareness, where we have hurdles, 80-meter hurdles for a woman or 100, whatever. I just want to mention one thing about these drills, is that if they do wall drills on their lead leg or their trail leg, they will do it with both, even if they are short hurdles. And one very important thing that Boris also mentioned this morning is to keep the alignment of the body, that you don't overdevelop one side and the other side stays behind. It doesn't get those nerve impulses as well as the muscle development. Very short, and then I'll stop. Some examples that you can see. For me, a hurdle drill that I selected in training had to make sense for me. And it had to fit my athlete's profile and their weak points that I could make stronger. For example, I used very similar drills for my beginners and my top athletes and my national and international athletes. The big difference came in how they performed the drills. And they could just do it better and better and better. Very short ones there you can see, and also regarding the method of preparation, obviously in your preparation season, more drills, and in your season, the drills became less, but I never took them out. I always did them even in warm-up before competition, because you get warm-up drills as well. I just want to mention there's another one here, and then lead leg drills, very important. Lead leg drills also with both. And then I just have to talk about what happens sometimes. You get stuck with your hurdlers and they say you have to think about it and everything, but you think and you look at photographs. But what I found is that you sometimes, as a coach, you can become blind in inverted commas to your athletes' faults, and they as well. And I think here, and some people are open to it, others are not. I make use of top coaches like Sandy Ewan from Scotland, Dr. late Harvey Stefan from INSEP in France. He was ruthless, but he was brilliant. And then Frank at Loughborough to make objective observation about my athletes and said, maybe you can consider that or that. And sometimes you just don't see it like that because you're so used to athletes. So what is very important, that analysis is the key, because it dictates where your attention goes then as a coach. And then the last, and then I'll stop here. I won't do the faults of athletes. If we have time, we can later go back to that. As when I see how drills are evolving with different athletes. Now we know that human movement has got a highly intricate network of subsystems, and these subsystems are very different in each person. And they have different contributors towards those substances. They have different genes. They have different backgrounds. The one is tall, the one is short, different muscle, some have more red, some white, and some muscle fibers. So critical thinking and knowing your athlete shows the way you and your athlete evolve. And now I just want to mention the last three: observation of new approaches in hurdle drills that I see that is coming out more. I see that hurdle drills are done with fewer hurdles, but that's all done with speed. And there's a lot of fast feet drills, usually about 5 to 7 hurdles over wickets or baby hurdles, not over high hurdles or even low-high hurdles. And then, very important, that hurdle mobility is done with additional apparatus, not just over hurdles, like, for example, with stretch bands, foam rollers for fascia warm-up, and Pilates-like stretches. Now, to show examples of where technique goes wrong in a race that you can use as a coach, we'll come back to that later, or else I'll go over my time too much. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Rita. Cliff, we'll switch up order here just for a little variety, and we'll come back to you, Craig. Cliff, how about your fundamental view on drills, your concept of their value, how you develop them, how you evolved over time?
Sure, absolutely. I think that first of all, I'm like Craig. My real love is the combined events, and I was gravitated towards those events because of it enabled you to be involved in every aspect of our sport, which I absolutely loved. At one time or another, I'd coached every single event area, including cross country. I just love the whole sport. But again, going back to the fact that I did not compete in athletics and that I didn't have much background there, and my background came more from biomechanics. When I first got involved in sport, there were a lot of things that I saw being done that just didn't make a lot of sense to me. There were a lot of things being taught, and the old TAC coaching, things you'd see in TAC coaching manuals, and a lot of the stuff that was being taught that just didn't make biomechanical sense to me at all. And so I kind of got into things from a little bit different perspective. And because I was such a novice and didn't have much background, I bought every coaching manual. I went to every clinic. I bought every tape that I could afford to purchase, and exposed myself to everything. And again, there was a lot of good in that, but there also was a lot of stuff that just didn't make sense. And so my background came more from what made sense to me, from a biomechanical standpoint, and in the real world, working with the population of athletes I was working with, what they could do, what they could handle. I think that, and I know I think you're going to get off into training a little bit later, but one of the things that's always resonated with me was I saw athletes being taught things or attempting to be taught, and they were physically not capable of doing what they were being asked to do. So I think that I absolutely believe that drills are important. To be honest, my repertoire of drills went from hundreds for each individual event to now where it's down to 4 or 5, that I have over time selected as being, what's most appropriate for me with the athletes that I work with and the environments I work with. But the other thing that's important to me, and I'm sure Craig will touch on this as well, is that being a combined events type person, coming from that background and having that love, I'm always looking for commonalities of events. And so I always try to use drills that are applicable for more than just one event. And then I can make the use of our time much more efficient. We can get a lot more done in a shorter period of time. And so that's kind of where I fall on drills. I think that certainly with beginning athletes, having more variety and doing different things is good. But as we moved along, and there's some athletes that I've coached for 15, 16, 17 years. Some of those athletes, by the time we got to the end of their career, there were basically 3 or 4 drills that we did. Maybe different variations of those drills, but there were basically a core of 3 or 4 drills.
All right, thank you, Cliff. Craig, same question to you, how you sort of developed and evolved over the time. Craig, you're muted.
I am mute, kind of, in some ways. So anyway, dealing with it. In as much as I said I was a genetics coach, I had to evolve like Cliff over a period of time. When I was growing up, my sport was American football. And that's what I had dreams of becoming until I found out that when I got to college, I was not really big enough to play that game. And so I decided I would look to other sports. And as I was going through my educational process, as I said, my dad told me never to be a coach, but that's the thing I gravitated to because I loved it so much and the sporting environment. When I was at Utah State University, I was taking a class from Ralph Mon, who was the track coach at the time. He was the coach of L.J. Sylvester and a few other world-class international throwers. He happened to live 2 blocks from where my parents lived, and my first job was in Salt Lake City. And so every time I go to visit my parents didn't see me very much because I would go over to his house and I would spend a lot of time with him talking about the various events. He motivated me to the point where I thought, well, when I started coaching junior high school, my first experience in a championship meet was that I got second. And I said, I didn't like the feel of that. So I had to say, okay, then how am I going to get better? Well, I'm going to get better by knowing and being able to understand the events more correctly. So I started to invest in what books and what kinds of things, just like Cliff, that I could read and I could become familiar with in order to learn about the various events. Thus, I had a library, a lot of books, plus track and field news, plus the coaches' book that the NCAA coaches put out on skills. I can't remember exactly right now what the title of that was, but anyway, that's kind of where I picked up a lot of information. Then my athletes in the junior high school where I was coaching became the kind of the guinea pigs of the things that I was learning. And so I would teach it to them and see, what the outcomes were. My first introduction was to sprint drills, for example, was Bud Winter's little book, cartoon book on the various aspects of high knees and A runs and B runs and relaxation and the things that he taught. And as time evolved, then I was able to pick up more and more things as life went on and as I got more and more into each of the individual events. With regards to drills, every drill, like the other panelists have said, came out of watching the individual athletes perform and move and look at what their movement behavior was. My drills were not necessarily in my beginning, were not specific to the sprint or to the running forum. It was more or less coordination. I did a lot of work with regards to balance, a lot of work in regard to agilities, a lot of work in just strengthening the various muscle groups before I got into the exact specific areas of sprinting and running. Everything that I did, I started slow. Started with walking, and after walking, jogging, and after jogging, running. So I kind of build it up over time, and those are various speeds with each one of those categories. Walking slow, walking faster, walking fastest, jogging slow, jogging faster, jogging fastest, and until I was able to groom what I thought was important. Now, in our learning, we've heard the words thrown out there that uh, muscle memory is so important when we teach skills. Well, there's no such things, folks, as muscle memory. It's called myelin memory. The myelin sheath is what develops and grows as we experience the skills. And as we perform the skill over and over and over again, the body then adapts, and the memory comes within the nervous system itself. I like to recommend some things that people ought to look at. On Instagram, there's this program called Grandma's Children's Drills. It's the most fascinating things in how you teach young children how to have coordination and skills, eye-hand coordination. Those are some of the basics that even now coming out of high school, going to college, I found out a lot of basic kids didn't have those movement behaviors and had to be taught, even though they had a lot of good motor abilities. In some respects, there was a lot of motor abilities they did not have. Then there's a couple of videos that are out there that show the skills and why and how you apply them. Curtis Beach, for example, from uh, California in San Diego area, he has a very good series of drills that he talks about, and he tells you why you should do them and how you should do them. Shari Hawkins is another one. Another book that should be read about is called The Goldmine Effect. Anyway, all of this start slow, end fast eventually over time, communicate. Drills themselves, once they are learned, can also be a strengthening component as well within the avenue of what we do in our sports. One thing that I've learned a long time ago is that in our sport, we have to have, just one second, I got to pull this up. It's called associative perceptual adaptation. In other words, the athlete has to perceive the skill, and they have to understand what the reality is in terms of interpretation of how that skill is to be performed. Allowing the athlete to have a background and doing some experimenting on their own when you're first introducing it to them is important. I don't care at what level. Vince Lombardi often said in his discussions, a coach is not worth his salt unless he goes back to basics every year. So the skills and the drills that I have and that I used would go back to the very fundamental drills at the first of every year, no matter what level of athlete that I worked with. And we would spend several weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, in just developing and strengthening those skills. Um, the skill itself, technical skill, is an optimal approximation of the ideal nature and mastery of the sport. And that is based upon the individual things, as Rita has indicated. Every athlete is different. Every athlete has different fiber type. They have different limb lengths. They have different attitudes. And you have to adapt that. And it's an approximation of what the ideal might be in the biomechanic picture of things. Um, so, yes, I spend a lot of times on drills, but specifically to the outcome of where I want the athlete to go. So I have to have a picture and convince the athlete that there is an outcome. And I try to show them by video or by film outstanding athletes who have performed the skills that we're trying to master ourselves. Once they have that perceptual understanding of what they're trying to do, then it's much easier for them to implement the things that we're trying to teach. So anyway, those are the key points of the drills we use. And I'm like Cliff. I started off with a drill for everything you can imagine. I've invented drills that sometimes had ridiculous applications. I mean, you try it, you think it's going to work. Yeah, fine. But over time, you end up paring it down to where it is specific to what the end product is going to be. And then you master it for strength and coordination, because there's in the book, what it's called, oh, I can't remember. It's oh I'm sorry I'm so slow, but it has to do with the anyway. I'm sorry, I can't remember what it was. But anyway, the idea is that you spend a lot of time developing the skill, and you have to be very, very specific to the development of that skill and have many, many repetitions. And some people say 10,000 hours or 10,000 repetition is what develops it. Maybe so, but it's not so much the 10,000 as much as the specificity and the accuracy of what you're trying to put together, and then developing the strength to handle that particular skill.
Thank you. And the quality of what you're doing. You know, like
Yes,
practice
absolutely.
doesn't make perfect.
Perfect practice makes perfect.
Yeah,
And I have a saying that I give to the athletes. Your practice, there's two ways to practice. Perfectly right, perfectly wrong. Practice perfectly right.
Frank?
Yeah, well, thanks very much indeed, team. These are really, really eye-opening insights. A couple of things I'd like to sort of pick up from that. One of the things that you said, Cliff, about the sort of the commonality side of things. If we go back to the years of former East Europe, the German Democratic Republic were very, very hot. Forget all the bad things they did. They did some really, really good things. And one of the things they did about technical models was when it came to drills and exercises, they spoke about first derivative and second derivative. Now, first derivative is an exercise that exactly replicates what's the outcome movement that you're looking for. The second derivative is one that generally works. So, for example, you might have a specific one for a first derivative for a high jump, but second derivatives for jumping themselves. You have a first derivative in hammer, a second derivative for the basic model of throws. And I think it is important to differentiate between the two. And one thing, incidentally, that helps in that whole development of these two and how we use them is really your background, Craig and Cliff, and that's combined events, or if you like, other sports. Because the more sports that a youngster can do as they're coming through their growing years, the more motor coordination patterns they can link up with. And I just thought I'd mention that. The other thing related to this was what came out this morning from Boris Rakowski. And it started with and you've all mentioned it, the importance of getting the basics right. And I'll come back to this question to all of you, by the way. I want you to tell me what the basics are, right? I want you to tell me what the basics are, because we talk about them all the time, but what are they and just how basic are they? Well, Boris came out with a great anecdote, and you've probably had similar ones in your own life. And it was this. There's this legendary coach in gymnastics who really has coached different countries, gold medals galore, and so on. Absolutely at the top of the. But Boris picked up in the fact that this guy was always working with athletes on a forward row. Now, you and I learned that stuff at school. It's kind of basic and so on. But Boris said to him, why? Why you keep on going back to that? Well, he said, well, if you cannot do a quality forward row, you can't do a forward flick. If you can't do that, you can't do multiple ones. And if you can't do that, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just wondering, whilst we talk about basics, very often, folks, we're really talking about, do you have the basic strengths? Do you have the basic X, Y, and Z? But sometimes it's something far more fundamental than that. It's a motor coordination. And I just want, I mean, you may have your own examples of that, but I thought I'd just mention that to you and leave you with this question, please. What do you consider to be the basics? It might be easy in one event, Rita, but for the multiple, what are we looking for, guys? What is it we're looking for and calling basics? Because we're agreed if we don't get the basics right, we're going to be in trouble later. One final point on this. I had the huge privilege of working with a legendary coach called Eddie Jones in rugby. And one of the things that we agreed on is that actually, when it comes to issues of technical mistakes and so on in the game at full speed, It's always a simple, basic mistake, a basic skill that is not executed properly. And why? Well, Rita kind of summed this up. Once we get into the elite level of sport, it's all about speed, folks. I mean, it's the speed barrier that we are constantly chasing. Doesn't matter what sport we're in. And why is it a problem then? Because time and space shrinks. Time and space shrinks. It's exactly the same basic movement. But somehow or other, we get that wrong under these. And maybe some drills should be designed to take you to that level of speed where you have to learn to adjust and get the awareness that Rita's talked about. Sorry if that's too long, Richie.
No, that's fine. And that I was actually gonna make a point, and then I'll go to you, Rita, that since my background is like Cliff's and Craig's, not being a very talented decathlete, but loving those events, I think what all three of you have been saying from the start is, and no matter what the reasons, multitude of reasons, but modern day, there's really kind of a lack of movement variety and movement literacy of younger athletes. And so even when they have good talent and achieve a decent level, they still might be limited in that. And that's one thing I think, as Cliff and Craig have pointed out, that, even in training for combined events, you have a variety of movements of all sorts for better balance, better mobility, better proprioception, better awareness, and so forth. But I think, the point is well taken, Frank. What are the basics? And I'm going to add one thing to that too, because one of the people that used to be very involved in this, and one of my mentors, Wolfgang Ritzdorf, he made a key distinction between not only technique and form or style, but identified key things that you needed to do to be successful. But around that, there could be a lot of variation to take into account individualized size, speed, strength, different muscle fibers. And in the high jump, he would talk about, where you are on the penultimate, where you are when you plant, where you are when you leave the ground. Rita, the South African high jumper from 15 years or so ago, she was best in the world. What was her name?
What was her name? She now lives in New Zealand. I'll remember her name just now.
Yeah, Hestra Kloite, if that's the proper one. And people would just criticize the big arm motion, all that. And as Wolfgang pointed out, she's in the position you need to be in the penultimate, to be in the perfect position to plant, to be in perfectly vertical at takeoff. Those other things are stylistic and may help her adapt to get into those positions. So sometimes we tend to make everybody perfect, but what are the basics, as Frank was saying, and how do you deal with the individualization and allow style that still allows for proper technical movement?
Okay, just before we go to Rita, Richie, just to pick up on, again, my obsession with basics. I coached a young high jumper called Dalton Grant, 2 meters 37, so he wasn't bad. But when Dalton came in to begin with, his feet were all over the place. In fact, they weren't quite 1/4 to 3 feet, but they were definitely 10 to 2 feet. When we're talking about basics, one of the things we had to work on from the very beginning was how to run and to get the gait correct. And very often coaches simply accept the fact that the athlete's got a particular gait. But if it's totally out of line, there's absolutely no way you're going to get the propulsion from the feet through the legs through the rest of the body that you need. And I know Rita's got a solution to this, so I'll leave it up to her.
I wouldn't say I've got a solution, but for me as a coach and in mentoring as well, and we recently had a specialist talking on fascia, and he made it so much clearer, and coming from a Pilates background as well. I think the most important thing is to remember there's a line that goes through your body, and you've got your bilateral, you've got two sides, a left and a right side. Now, the first basic for me is, for every action, there's a reaction. If you take off incorrectly in front of the hurdle, too close to the hurdle or too far from the hurdle, your parabolic curve will not be correct. And that will influence your speed which we do not want. And then also have the basic laws that a small tight angle is fast and an open angle, a long angle is slow. So if an athlete clears a hurdle and the foot is close to the butt and the knee come in, that will be a fast clearance. So you cannot get away from those biomechanic principles. For me, that is the basic: action, reaction, and then small, fast angles as to long, slow angles. And then the most important clearance nowadays that I see is that a lot of the hurdlers, and I don't know if I must say it's more on the sprint hurdles, because it's not, because I see this in the 400-meter hurdles when athletes use their so-called wrong leg, the non-dominant leg, is that the leading arm crosses over the body. So the moment that happens is that the whole alignment of the body changes. The right or the opposite hip opens and you land differently behind the hurdle, and you basically break yourself by doing that. So for me, there is no compromise in the basics. Those are the three principles that need to be correct. When I started hurdling, and in all the courses I did, I always said, you've got the line going through. This arm, the leading arm, never goes away from this line. The knee comes to the line and you land in front of that line. So crossing the line is a very different story. So those three are the basic principles for me, Frank.
Well, thank you.
If I may, I'm going to give you. I tell you one thing: as you get a lot older, you get a little bit less patient. And I'm a pretty patient person by nature, but I like to really get to it. And so, to Frank's point, I'd like to add on a couple of examples of when you talk about basics, and you talk about just as I mentioned a little bit earlier about a lot of times kids just aren't capable of doing what it is you're asking them to do. Okay, so I want to give you an example. And I'll name a name. Austra Skiuta was a Lithuanian heptathlete that I coached for about 7-8 years. She came to Kansas State University after spending 2 years at a university in Lithuania. And for those of you who don't remember Austra, she was an Olympic silver medalist in the hep in Athens in 2004, bronze medalist in London in 2012, and had some world indoor medals as well. Austra came in January of her junior year, and she had thrown over 14 meters in the shot. And again, if you don't remember, Austra threw over 17 meters in a heptathlon. I think in Athens she threw 1684 or something like that. Went from 23rd to 3rd from the high jump to the shot, just on the basis of that. That's a whole nother story. But anyway, in Austra's first throws session in Manhattan, Kansas, in January of her first year at Kansas State, and she'd thrown over 14 meters, which is a respectable throw for a heptathlete. But in the first session, I said, Austra, just do what you do, and I'm going to watch you, and that was it. And so I'm watching her. She throws. Okay, we finish the session. And she said, Coach, well, what do you think? And I said, well, Austra, I think what we need to do is spend a lot of time working in single support and balance in single support, because she literally in single support could not get from the back of the ring to the center of the ring 2 times in a row consistently. It was absolute adventure from the back of the ring to the center. And so that year, she threw 16 mid in the summer. The following year, she was the NCAA runner-up in the shot, threw over 17 meters in the shot. And of course, all the throws coaches throughout the collegiate ranks were, well, how did she make these kinds of improvements? And I said, well, you guys aren't going to believe the story really, because really what we did, the drills that we did were balanced drills in single support, just so that we could get from the back of the ring to the center of the ring the same way 2 times in a row consistently. So there's one example. Another example I would give is similar to what Frank talked about in the high jump. My wife made an Olympic team in the high jump Sydney in 2000. I didn't start working with her until the fall of 2000, after those games. And she jumped 197 when she was 33 years old, 3 years after that. And oftentimes she's asked, well, how did you make those kinds of improvements at that late age, and particularly, a lengthy training age, because she'd been jumping for 15 years by the time we'd started working together. And she was asked, how did you do that? Well, my coach taught me how to run. She couldn't run. She had no idea how to run. She was a plantar flexor. There's no way you can run a curve effectively tiptoeing through the curve. Now, she had jumped 194 doing that. She was obviously had some ability, but she was able to make progress after that, quite simply because she learned how to run, learned how to make quality contact with the ground. So, again, there's just a couple of examples, but I think those examples tell a huge story.
But Richie, can I just pick up on something that Cliff's mentioned there, because this is magic to hear this from you, Cliff. Way back again in the times of East Germany, one of the things that was mandatory for you if you were coaching a thrower, particularly in discus, by the way, and if you think about the rotation now in shot put, they would spend a lot of time on the very basics of balance. The benches that you have in gyms. If you turn them upside down, there's a very, very narrow bar. They would do the rotations walking along the bar. And I thought, how basic can you be? But this is why I'm asking the question. And so thanks for bringing that one up, because it really endorses everything that I was learning earlier.
All right, Craig.
In regards to what Frank has asked, I think there are some things that we need to keep in mind, and commonality. I think Cliff brought that up. Commonality and associative types of things are important. Specificity in general are terms that we use specific to the event, specific to the skill, and then there are general things that support that thing. Biomotor types of things, which when I look at this, biomotor means a variety of different kinds of movement patterns. Strength, coordination, eye-hand coordination, balance, and proprioception. All of these things are important as far as items that we can check off, and we need to have some tools that address each one of those areas. But I would like to venture to say that one thing that we do not spend a lot of time on, that we need to spend time on in every single event, is where are your eyes and where is your head? Now, I don't mean that psychologically, although I do mean it psychologically, but I mean positioning. For example, if you come around and you're talking about the high jump and you're looking directly at the bar at the incoming standard, where is your head? 10 pounds of weight living to the inside causes initial too much rotation beginning off the ground. What happens when you throw the javelin? If you pull your head to the side, you separate and you have vector forces rather than linear forces. So where is your head in order to align what it is that you're going to do specifically? And eye-hand coordination is important, and eye-foot coordination is important, and total body position is important. Where do you put that in regards to the skill? Now, I venture to say that if you were to really look at some of your athletes and why they're having difficulty in performing certain skills is they cannot see. And I don't know how many of you have had a visual acuity test and had athletes look at things. Do they need glasses? Do they need contacts? What do they need? I have coached athletes. In fact, just when I was coaching Shari a year ago, we had another athlete on board, and for the devil, I could not figure out why she was not getting on the board and why she was not doing certain things. She couldn't see it. And I finally figured out, do you wear glasses? Oh, yes. Why aren't you wearing them out here? Oh, I just don't like to wear them. I mean, it destroys the whole thing that you're trying to develop in terms of spatial relationship and being able to judge distance and judge positions. So I venture to say that we need to spend some time developing these skills and attune to the fact that we need to pay attention to where the eyes are focused. Balance, for example, where are the eyes focused? If you're standing on one foot, you turn your head left, you fall to the left. If you turn your head right, you'll fall to the right. It's just common what happens when you just do not align the head and the eyes in the right position. So that's something that I would encourage everyone to pay attention to, because I think it determines everything.
Can I just pick up on that one? That's a really, really good point. Okay, I'm showing my age now, but one of my big heroes when I was coming through college was Al Orta out in discus. And one of the things that I learned from him, or from coaches at that time, was that before he moved any feet off the back of the circle, as he turned, he focused on a particular point. If you imagine the back of the circle, if he was looking at 12 o'clock, he had to rotate till he could see 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock. And before he would move his feet at all, he had to get to that point, and that was his timing. So I think I'm hoping that sort of supports what you're saying, Craig, is we've got to have a greater awareness of that. And
Thank you.
And one additional thing, Richie, because it's coming through our various discussions here, is that are we really vigilant when it comes to making sure our athletes are doing the drills correctly? One of the things that Boris raised some years ago when we were having conversations was that in the West, we tend to be obsessive about techniques. In the East, in Eastern Europe, they were obsessive about the drills. They had to make sure that every drill was done exactly the way it should be done. But when do you intervene? Go and give you another anecdote here. Again, working with Eddie Jones, there was a training session, and the coach in charge of the line out at this point had the players doing 10 repetitions of a particular line out drill. And it came to the end of the 10th, and the leader in the line out said to the rest of the boys, "That's been terrible since the second attempt, and you've been repeating the mistake all the way through." Well, I have to say, I looked at the coach, and we had a discussion afterwards. Did you allow something to go on as a mistake so that they could practice it 8 times? And I think this comes back to thing you said it, Craig. Perfect practice. But I think coaches have got to be really vigilant as to when they step in the practice and change it then. Don't wait till the practice is over at the other end, because we're going to be allowing mistakes to be rehearsed. Does that make sense, guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, if I can, Richie, you go?
No, go ahead, Rita.
Okay. Well, I just want to say, and this is to follow up with Frank and his first derivative and the second, the general one. If we look back at some of the previous world record holders in the 100-meter women's hurdles, Georgina Rapstein, for example, I looked at her technique the other day. I think if you want to look at a model of perfection, a technical model, I think you'll have to go quite far. If you look at some of those East Germans, their perfect technique, and I think is that there's a whole shift in society towards people have different abilities, they have different styles. Do we allow it? Don't we allow it? But the main problem still occurs that if you go too far off the technical model and you bring in biomechanical mistakes, you will never reach the level of the times that they did. I mean, you can look at all the top athletes. They all look similar. They all have the same technique. They all had nearly perfect techniques. And I'm not talking about a straighter lead leg or more bent lead leg, but they drove off the hurdle in perfect angles and everything was fine. And you never saw, I actually had a look at a lot of these old videos the other day, and I never saw one of these women actually having an arm across, which occurs quite commonly nowadays in the women's hurdles. I don't know why. So what I'm saying is to come back to the first derivative, is that they're doing, and what Frank said, they're doing the drills perfectly correct. Are we slack in that direction? Are we allowing too many individual techniques or whatever approaches we want to call them?
Well, that's a great point, and just a thing to go along with that I was going to get to anyway. A lot of times there are athletes that, for one, have different backgrounds coming in. Sometimes they're better visual learners. Sometimes they're better temporally. I remember Dan Paff saying years ago he had two really good discus throwers. One of them, he could talk about angles and movement and specifics. The other one, he just have to say, get the hip into it. Athletes are different in what they can handle mentally as well, how much they see, how much they feel. So what do you do in terms of dealing with athletes that have different abilities to sense what they're doing? The problem now with young athletes today, oh, they want to see everything on a camera every time. They're never developing a feel. So how have you dealt in the past with athletes who respond differently to drills, have a better sense, those who have no sense, maybe those athletes don't go very far, those that are more spatially aware, those that are more temporally rhythm aware? How have you dealt with those things in helping to perfect technique and getting to do things right?
I think really good point, Richie. And if I can link that to something that was said a little bit earlier, but I think it was Craig mentioned Vince Lombardi. In this business, a great coaches always go back to the basics. Give you an example of somebody doing that in practice. Jack Nicklaus, who I have to say, Tiger Woods was great, but I have to say in his time, Nicklaus was probably the greatest golfer we'd ever seen. Every Christmas, guys, he would go back to California and get a hold of a professional coach, in his words, to realign his swing. Now, this is the greatest golfer in the world. I hope he's learned how to swing a golf club by this time. But his argument was that as you go through the year, your body picks up all sorts of compensations of movement to deal with this and that. And if you're not careful, the sharpness of a particular movement begins to go, and you begin to build in your own compensations. Now, I know, as Jon Tiriac used to say, every technique is a compensation, okay? And I know that, I'll come back to that one just in a second, but we've got to make sure that we don't build extra compensations in, which actually begin to damage the actual model. Lingering on this one, folks, can I come back to this idea of every technique as a compensation? Let's imagine that you're all coaching Usain Bolt, right? You're coaching Usain Bolt. You know how he runs. You've got a very clear picture of that. And along comes another athlete into your squad called Michael Johnson. Now, do you try to make Michael Johnson run the same way as Usain Bolt? Every athlete has their technique is a compensation specific to them. Vin Walsh, some of you may have come across Vin Walsh, a cognitive psychologist. When he came in to speak to coaches I was working with, he said, you should never take the athlete the whole way. All right? Take them 80%, his notional number, take them 80% of the way and let the athlete take it the rest of the way. My question then to us then, folks, in terms of drills or techniques, is it our real mark of excellence as coaches, not the 80%, because probably anybody can do that, but can we coach the difference? That's the question. Is that what separates us at the end of the day from being an ordinary coach to a coach who can really be effective? Who's going to go? Great.
Yes, I believe that going back to basics is ultimately important. I think once we've taught some of these drills that we do for the various events, sometimes we let the athlete go on their own and just go through the motions. And in relationship to your Jack Nicklaus example, having a sharp eye watching you perform daily to make sure that you do not slop into those biomechanical valleys that are non-productive. You need to really, really work on keeping an eye on what your athletes are doing daily in their drill.
Yep.
And it's not just in the skill of, for example, the hurdles, or not just the skill of the high jump. I think it's the skills of the biomotor activities that you have created in whatever drill that you've created for them to do, that you're making sure they do it perfectly right. And that means not just biomechanically range of motion. That means in intensity, in speed, in focus, position, the whole gamut.
100%. 100%.
I also think that the analytical coach know the athletes. I want to compare two athletes, female athletes that I coached. The one was, she started with me when she was only 13 years old. Her name was Michelle. I used to call her Michelle. We're still in good contact. And she later on, she broke 5-6 junior world SA South African record. She represented South Africa and ran in Australian meetings. But she had a problem that she used to, when she approached the hurdle, she used to like go back instead of forward. Now, on the other hand, I coached another athlete and I could say to her, Corin, just get that angle. Remember, the angle that you approach the hurdle is the angle that you will eventually go off the hurdle and it will not interfere with your running style. She immediately took to it and she could. Michelle couldn't. So what I did then, and I was much younger and I was much faster, I used to run next to Michelle, next to the hurdle, hold her hand. And when she wanted to go upright, I pulled her forward and gradually she got used to her body where it was in relation to the hurdle. Obviously, to say not long and she was running away and say, leave my hand, I could do it. So what I'm saying is that the critical thinking of the coach makes their communication in different athletes, because all athletes are different, how they can actually overcome that problem. And they were different. They had different styles and everything, and they were both clever. Michelle has got a doctorate in mathematics nowadays, but she couldn't comprehend that feeling, and she had to feel it where the other one understood it. So I think it's a very difficult how critical the coach can analyze ways to communicate with different athletes.
Okay, can I just pick up on that one? That's a really good point. That last word, the second to last concept, communication, the coach's language. Now, I really liked your point that you raised, Greg, about how the athlete perceives the skill. Okay. Can I take that as not just a visual thing, but a feeling thing? One of the things I always loved as I was trying to learn about coaching was that coaches had the magical ability to use what I would call a kinesthetic language. They would use words that made athletes feel a movement. In fact, made them rather more self-aware of what was happening to them. So one of the things, I think Jesse Owens' coach, again, I wasn't alive. Didn't see him when he's full flow in 1936, by the way. not quite that old. What he spoke about was running on eggs when you were at speed. And I love this kind of picture. And I told the group this morning, I told a story very much against myself, working with a young guy called Cameron Sharp. And I was trying to get him to accelerate off the bend in the 200 meters. He just wasn't doing that. And I was shouting out, I was like, come on, Cameron, drive. And I was doing a session in Edinburgh when Don Corey was there for the Highland Games. And he was jogging past me and he heard me shouting. And he came up to me and whispered into my ear, said, Frank, it's not drive, it's lift. So I kind of looked at him like he didn't know what he was talking about. And then I tried it. And as if by magic, Cameron got the message and he felt it. Now, I wonder, folks, because you're all world-class coaches, everybody in this call is a world-class coach. Maybe we should be working at some point, not quite a dictionary, but kind of a thesaurus, if you like, of how we communicate, the words that we use to help athletes feel, not just the feeling of the movement, but actually their personal awareness of it. Am I on track with that?
I think you're really right on spot on this, because I think what you have to convey is where you want them to go, not where they've been.
Yeah.
And if you look at the world of psychology, anytime that you call attention to what mistakes they have made, you reinforce that mistake. So the language we have to use is to push them in the direction we want them to go, and we have to define some terms. In other words, they not, in learning styles, people hear differently. They hear different words. Their background presents different definitions of different terminology. So working with the athlete one-on-one, we have to come up with a terminology for that athlete of things that you can use that will help them to move in the direction you want them to go. So that, positive reinforcement is important, but also the language that we use in terms of their perception is also important, based upon how they pick up, how they learn, and how they implement.
Absolutely right. And I think Rita mentioned it earlier. We really have to know the individual, don't we, to really know our athletes. And a kind of story to support what you're saying there, Craig, is that, again, there was a rugby session, freezing cold day in the north of London. The snow was going horizontal. It was a bitterly cold day. And we had this thing that probably a wrong use of the expression, but we had what we called a hot debrief. And there were two coaches there and myself in a little huddle. And one of the coaches said, I said to Fred across there, you've got to be braver. You've got to have more courage when you're out there. And the second coach said, I wouldn't like you saying that to me. And I looked at him and said, well, why wouldn't you like to say, well, I think you were calling me a coward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Interpretation.
wow. Yeah. We really have to know our people.
So, Richie, if I may, so to paraphrase, what I'm hearing from all these wonderful coaches is that really what we want to be doing is coaching the athlete, and as opposed to the event. Really, that's really what it comes down to. Perfect. So we have regardless of what event we're talking about, you've got a technical model that we're working towards, but we've got athletes that learn differently, that hear differently, that interpret differently, that have issues that are individual to themselves. And I'm going to give an example that I dealt with. In my career, I've been fortunate to work with a lot of really wonderful high jumpers, both male and female. And at the university level, we had a couple different trios of guys that were 225 plus on the same team. And one of these trios, there was a 6 foot, 200-pound middle linebacker who jumped 227 at 6 foot, 200 pounds. We had a 6'4", 180-pound young man from Israel who was a higher training age because he had to serve in the military before coming to the university, whose coach had been one of the previous national coaches from the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union broke up, those coaches scattered all over the world. One of them ended up in Israel. And the third guy in this one of these trios was a guy who came from a high school of 50 people, 50 in the whole high school at a small town in Kansas. One of those guys ended up playing in the NFL, was an NCAA champion in high jump, ended up playing in the NFL. One of those guys was a finalist of world championships, and one of those guys was an Olympian. But they were completely different backgrounds, completely different people. And during the time frame in which I was working with them at the university, was often asked, well, you have three guys jumping real high collegiately, what do you do with them? And the answer was always the same. Well, which one? And they're like, no, just in general, what do you do with these guys? It's completely different. How am I going to train a guy who's a middle line, who's 6 foot, 200-pound middle linebacker, and a kid, small town Kansas kid that had no training background whatsoever? How could I possibly train those guys the same way? It's completely different.
And I think this is maybe one of the most important things we have to learn as coaches from the very outset is that we have to be able to do the adapt. We expect athletes to do the adapting, but it's us that has to do the adapting first, I think, in order to adapt the world so that the athlete can grow in it and create the right level of learning experience.
So who do we coach? Do we coach the athlete or do we coach the technique?
No, we coach the athlete, which is beautiful. Yeah, I've made that as part of my summary, by the way. So it's done already.
I'm gonna throw out a couple other, 2 or 3 other things for you to think about. Respond to any or none of these if they ring a bell. These are just thoughts I had earlier. One is you're cueing. You cue them during drills. You cue them during the whole event in practice. You cue them in competitions, keeping it more, but towards real competitive season. The difference between October drills and June or July competition. How does that cueing change and focus change? That's one thing possibly to look at. Second thing, when you try everything with an athlete and nothing works, what have you, are they just things you drop? Do you keep working at other ways to do them? Do you have some other coach step in and help? And a third thing that Cliff mentioned earlier, when Carol, his wife, he took over coaching her, that was a major change in learning how to run, but it was also different than like an ingrained movement at plant necessarily that somebody runs fine already. So how do you take somebody, maybe an older athlete that comes to you that has already a really ingrained technique and maybe what you think is maybe a gross problem? Do you still try to change it? Do you make minor, in other words, when you're getting older athletes that have ingrained technique, do you leave it alone and focus on other strengths to make them better? Do you try to break down things? Just any of those that anybody wants to handle.
If I can maybe add, no, Craig, you
Please,
go ahead.
Rita, go ahead.
Cliff, Craig, you go ahead first.
Well, if I may, with respect to with cueing, that always is it's a sensitive spot with me because I see it done so improperly, so often with so many. I think in general, I myself, in general prep, I always cue spatially with all my athletes. It's where limbs are in space. And then as we start to see, repetitive movements, correct movements, we may start to cue temporarily as long as they understand, we're on the same page there. But that's just a very general sequence that I follow. But one of the things that I've seen happen a lot with my athletes is that I will use a particular cue. I look at cue as just a trigger that fires a gun. It elicits a response that we're looking for. And sometimes, and this is brilliance in coaching, the coach may say the exact opposite of what it is we're wanting to see, but that elicits the response, the correct response. Okay. And so sometimes as coaches, we can sit back and say, be critical. That coach is telling that kid to do the wrong thing when really they know their athlete and they're telling them something that's eliciting the response that they're looking for. And that's brilliant coaching. But one of the things I think we have to be careful about, and this is with coaches working together or athletes working together, is that because I oftentimes will have large, I may have 8 to 10 high jumpers I'm working with at the same time, or 8 to 10 combined eventers I'm working with at the same time. And I use different cues to elicit the same response with different athletes. And I will have an athlete, well-intentioned, giving their cue to another athlete. And I have to step in right away and like, no, we're not doing that. I say this to you because this is what works for you. This may not work for them. And so I know you're well-intentioned, but we may be doing more harm in that. And so I think we have to be very intentional about the cues that we use, be they spatially oriented or temporal, and in the time of the year and with the specific athlete. I think that's something that I see done improperly all too often.
If I can add here as well, is that coaches must learn to listen to their athletes. That's one of the very important facts that I've learned at Loughborough University when I did a high performance course there. And actually, Frank taught me this. I had this 400-meter hurdler, and during training, she usually came up to the 6 hurdle. She shuffled and she stopped. She did it once or twice during her races as well. And I claim that I've never shouted at athletes, but I did shout at Debbie. I tried everything. When I came back from Loughborough, I said, okay, Debbie, I can't solve your problem. You come up with a solution how we can solve your problem. I can't do it. I obviously don't have the skill. I don't have you such an individual, strong individual. How can I solve your problem? And she said to me, Rita, you know what? When I come between the hurdle 5 and hurdle 6, you say to me, do this and this and this. I am not going to do that. I'm going to do different. I'm going to do this. I said, Debbie, that is a perfect solution. You've got it. I didn't believe she had it, and I didn't think it was technically correct. But she stopping at the 6th hurdle during races, and gradually it came back to what I wanted. So what I have learned to be patient and to listen to what my athlete says, and that I am not always right. Doesn't matter how much I know, it doesn't matter how many drills I knew, it doesn't matter how many I coached, all people are different, and I still need the ability to learn to listen to my athletes.
Great.
Craig?
You're on mute, Craig.
Okay. The thing that has to happen is that these cues that we're talking about also need to be coached. Because, I mean, you can use your terminology, but if it has no meaning, it's in the wind. So you have to have that, again, go back to what everybody said. It is the relationship that you've had with the athlete and the understanding. And I think what Cliff has said about other athletes inputting their information, it does cause a little bit of consternation within the athlete when they're trying to really groove something in that's important to them. And they have to listen to their coach. So yeah, I think that these kind of cues and whatnot have to be individualized. They have to be coached. They have to be persistent. And the key comes to the adaptation of the coach. We have to adapt to every single athlete. And that is the challenge of our coaching careers, actually.
Well, thanks, Craig. Richie, it's just about time for me to summarize, but just to pick up on your question, in the run through from October through to I think what the common factor in how we coach is, from the drill side, is whole part whole, isn't it? Is to make sure that we've got the right, whatever the part is, it really relates to the whole, and you keep doing that throughout the season. But there's also something that Boris mentioned this morning, I think, which I think is really relevant, and you guys do it all the time, that it's worth re-emphasizing, and that is that every situation is a stimulus for learning, whether we're in training or whether we're in competition. And as we go through the period of preparation from October through to the competition season, I think we have to have at the back of our mind that we spoke about specific training. You've all mentioned specific training, but the most specific training is competition, right? Competition itself. And as we go closer to the peak performance of the year, I think it's how we manage to utilize the stimulus, the learning stimulus through the competition that again brings us back to the basics of whole part whole and other basics holding strong as we go through. So having said that, Richie, is it okay for me to do a quick summary now?
Sure.
Okay, folks. First of all, each drill, things I've been picking up from you, big lessons that I'm learning. So this is what I've learned today. Each drill must be in harmony with the whole body and the whole movement. I think that is important. And the movement, I think other words that you used was the outcome. The drill must be relevant to the outcome. Whole part whole, we've just mentioned it. To make sure that we understand where the derivatives 1 and derivatives 2, the commonality stuff, fits into that cyclic pattern of whole part whole. Repetition of correct movement is what we're after. Make sure that the what is right, and most importantly, the how. Basic related to this is get the basics right and keep visiting these regularly. Next point is time and space shrinks. The basics are the same. Make sure that our drills are right. And as we get closer to the competition, we relate these things to the time. We have to relate the basics to the constrained time and space that's available to us. The next point, motor coordination, is something that we can build on a multi-sport basis. And you've all said it yourselves, give them this reservoir, this is the resource of motor coordinations that we can then use ultimately to align with the outcome. We adjust the drill to the athlete, or if you like to come back to our final points here, adjust ourselves to the needs and the specificities of the athlete. Critical thinking and knowing your athlete is important. In fact, may I build on that last one there? The way I see it is know your purpose, know your athlete, know yourself, and know your stuff. Make sure you get these bits of knowledge right, and we'll make a successful journey. Remember that we cannot defy the points that you've all made. You cannot defy the laws of biomechanical principles. We must all be aware of that. But with coaches coming through, are they as aware as the previous generation has been of the need to understand the biomechanics? And related to this is to make sure that young coaches coming through don't just copy what other people do. They must take time to understand these basics of biomechanics. We spoke about repeating the perfect. There's perfect practice that makes perfect performance. But related to this, making sure that coaches understand they should intervene, even with drills, intervene immediately to make sure that they're done properly. Otherwise, we're just practicing mistakes. Competition is a more specific form of training. Next one, I think we all came around to at the end, because it related to knowing our athletes. Question our athletes to get them involved in their development. Then listen to them. It's not just a matter of asking them. I think a lot of people look for right answers in life, but the real trick in life is to ask the right questions so that the athletes can get themselves involved, and we must listen to what they're saying. Finally, or two last points. One is we should be aware that we should be competent at coaching the difference. All our athletes are going to be different in some shape or form. The basic model of 80%, most coaches can deal with. Can we adjust ourselves to take the athletes, a Usain Bolt as opposed to a Michael Johnson and so on? Do we understand that last part is something we should not be meddling around with, but helping the athlete to leverage to their advantage? And finally, and probably it summed up everything that you said, very simple line: coach the athlete, not the event. Richie, thank you for masterfully hosting us tonight. Thank you so much for that. Rita, as brilliant as always. Craig, again, as brilliant as always. Cliff, we've met for the first time today, but my goodness, I've learned a lot from you. Behind the
Thank you.
scenes, Kevin, thank you for your for getting the technology right. I think this has been a wonderful evening. To be quite honest, I think we could have had this conversation for another 90 minutes. Thank you so much, and let's get back together again sometime soon. Thank you, Richie.
Great. Thanks
Thank
to
you.
all of you.
Thank you. Thanks, Richie.